Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session. Just to confirm where you are and where you are planning to be today. You are in the REA session on African American memories. So welcome. We have two presenters this morning. We will hear first from Reverend Dr. Barbara Fears, and then we will have take about 10 minutes for Q&A after she presents to us. And then we will hear from Ombeni Martin Ulime, who is a seminary student at Luther Seminary and is a Tanzanian citizen. So if you have questions, feel free to use the reactions to raise your hand or to use the chat for us to be able to speak with each other. A couple reminders. Ideally, we will have read the papers before this meeting. If you haven't, certainly allow those who have read and have already arrived with questions to step forward with those. But let's all listen together with an active spirit of curiosity, and we will continue to learn from the presentations. Let's practice generosity and assume good intentions. I've mentioned the raise hand, and I will I'll keep us on time as best I can. So we'll respect one another in that way. And I'm going to reiterate the feedback survey at the end. I'll make sure to call us to a conclusion about 5 minutes early so that we will be able to do that. So, with all of that said, let me give an introduction of Reverend Dr. Fears this morning. So Dr. Barbara Annette Fears is an assistant professor of religious education at Howard University School of Divinity in Washington, D.C. She teaches courses in the history, theory, and practice of ministry. Her research focuses on issues of power, privilege, and accountability, faith formation and praxis of faith, and curriculum development. Recent works include CRT, Critical Race Theory in Theological Education, a presentation to the Washington Theological Consortium, a book review on critical race theory in education, and an article on race, disability, and COVID-19, a discrit analysis of theological education. Dr. Fears also works as a hospice chaplain and is ordained in the United Church of Christ. And we will begin with a song. Oh, you're muted.
I don't want to begin with the song. I want to say a few words and then.
Okay, sounds great. I'll hold.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for journeying with us today. I wanted to just introduce the song. I based the title of my paper upon a line from a song entitled Breaths by Sweet Honey in the Rock, where the artist suggests that the ancestors never leave us. They are in the fire and in water specifically, and in other inanimate objects, and that we should listen more often to things than to beings. So now I'd like to have the song played, which is publicly available on YouTube, so I don't think we're in any copyright violations. Could you play the song for me now, please, Tiffany? Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. Fire burns and purifies, water cleanses and baptizes. And if we listen to things such as oppressive laws enacted to protect hegemonic self-interest, what these people passing the laws, more than what these people passing the oppressive laws say, then we will notice a pattern. It is the same story, different day. People in power seeking to maintain the power by any means necessary. In this country, the people in positions of power and control never change their playbook. As such, we are fighting the very same battles our ancestors fought, which is why we must go back and get what we have forgotten, or more accurately, what we have abandoned in an integrated, or rather in a desegregated society. We retrieve by remembering and recalling the familial and the national stories of resistance and the practices of these resilient people, dehumanized and disenfranchised, who not only survived, but have thrived in a nation hostile to our existence, as evidenced by repetitious oppressive maneuvers. As a woman of parentage born in Confederate states, I speak of my people of the transatlantic slave trade of this settler colony. In short, I assert that religious educators in the church and in the academy must complement the public education system, first by encouraging resistance to unhealthy hegemonic teaching, and secondly, by employing specific measures to counter oppressive hegemonic strategies in the wider society. In other words, we must discern and resist miseducation, much like our ancestors, and start by not lying about the history of our nation that is recorded in pictures, treaties, and other legal documents. The US is and remains a colonial state. We were founded as a British colony, and by the continuous immigration, we remain a colonial settler colony, having displaced the indigenous inhabitants and built a world in support of the European colonial settlers. To state the facts is not revisionist history, as is often asserted against critical race theorists. Rather, it is a statement of historical facts that some find uncomfortable or unpleasant, while at the same time reaping the benefits of skin color privilege. Religious education in the church and in the academy must counter such miseducation and misrepresentation and move beyond teaching the sacred text and faith-based doctrine without regard for the socio-political context. Instead, we must go back and get the practices of our ancestors. When formerly enslaved Blacks left the plantation, they built churches and schools that taught people how to read and write and how to secure employment. We need the same functional skills ministries in our churches that teach people basic skills to pursue higher education, to open businesses, and/or to secure employment and to function in an ever-changing society. We are inundated via social media, movies, and television that glorify unhealthy attitudes toward other people groups and attachment to hate groups. Thus, we need to teach critical thinking and coping skills to resist such anti-human propaganda. For some, basic survival skills, that is, how to survive a police encounter, must be taught, as well as techniques for employability, formerly taught in schools founded by Black women like Nannie Helen Burroughs and Mary MacLeod Bethune. We need to reflect upon dominant cultural beliefs and behaviors. For example, whites have never been fearful of Black presence, as evidenced by their presence in the slave quarters to rape Black women, juke joints to enjoy Black music, and in certain Black neighborhoods to purchase illicit drugs. This so-called "I don't feel safe" police calls on Black people in so-called white spaces is a ruse and reflects the mentality that established and still governs this nation, allowing whites to determine Black placement. Let me here introduce critical race theory that is under attack by the misinformed and by those who are intentionally misrepresenting the framework and its relevance. Critical race theory is not anti-white scholarship, but does take seriously the distinctive experiences of people of color and does challenge the experiences of whites as standard. In fact, the theory was created by a group of multiracial and multi-ethnic lawyers and activists in response to the rollback of civil rights legislation from the 1950s and 60s. The fundamentals of critical race theory are: racism is endemic to US society, the normal way of doing business. Racism is institutional, not just individual. Thus, racism is woven into the interrelated systems of U.S. operations. Racism provides a material benefit to rich whites and a psychological benefit to poor and working class whites. A property right that elevates white interests above people of color. And race is a social construct, not a biological reality. Thus, as a fluid invention, races are categories that can be manipulated or retired. For example, there was a time in the US where neither Jewish people, Irish, or Italians were considered white. CRT is not a black-white binary, in part because Jewish and Islamic faiths have been denied rights and access and opportunities, and these are faith traditions, not strictly racial ethnic identities. CRT stems from two previous movements, critical legal studies, from which CRT concluded that not every legal case has one correct outcome, and from radical feminism, from which CRT builds upon the power and construction of social roles, patterns, and habits of domination. Critical race theorists study and seek to transform the relationship between race, racism, and power, which makes the theory equally applicable to the situation in Ukraine, where the Russian president is claiming the Ukrainian people to be Russian to justify the war, and the Ukrainian people say they are not. CRT would be equally applicable as a methodological tool to examine the recent Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe v. Wade, in that once again, those in power have made a decision impacting persons without political power currently to counter. So I'll end with that and open for questions. I think I stayed under my 10 minutes.
Oh, you stayed well under your 10 minutes.
I like to talk. I like Q&A much better than lecture.
Okay. Well, I mean, with such excellent preparation that we had with the virtual tools and the website that was prepared for us, I'm sure plenty of people had time to review the paper. I will start out by saying what a delight it was for me just to have the clarity. Critical race theory is certainly familiar, but to realize the many ways that it's been broken down. And I don't know that there's one of us who could read all of the scholarship on it. And so to still get some fresh perspectives and some continued ways as we continue to look for how we can engage people in conversation and have them remain in the conversation. And so I think you really, Dr. Barbara, have presented some real strategies for that, especially with the applicability to these other contexts. And so that's something that I very much appreciated about the paper. And I share that as people are gathering their thoughts and preparing to engage in some Q&A with the paper that's been presented to us.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to briefly summarize for people who may not have had the time to read.
Mm-hmm. I see Maureen O'Brien, that you've got your hand raised.
Oh.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much, Barbara, for the paper and for your presentation. I guess my question had to do with, I'm interested in hearing you maybe tease out further your major point, I think, about the role of narrative in what you're advocating in terms of religious education and critical race theory, and I assume anti-racism in general. What I was thinking about was your critique of misinformation in the U.S. and the need for people to have accurate information. And I was trying to put that together. I suppose I'd be interested in your putting it together in some terms of a real life group you might work with, because what I've experienced sometimes is when I talk with white people sometimes and take a kind of an experiential approach related to race, is they go to their experiences and they say, well, I've not seen this. I've not seen, the racist history of the US, or if I've seen it, it's gone now, everybody's equal, et cetera, And so they kind of go to their own anecdotes. And I love the narratives that you included in your paper. I thought they were so powerful. But how do you bring together the need to combat misinformation on the one hand and the need to draw upon narrative? Can you just reflect a little further upon that?
Yeah, well, the first story that comes to mind is, and I honestly don't know the full story behind the man who was just shot at 90 times. And the man from Highland Park. I was in Chicago over the weekend. I formerly worked at the hospitals where these two people were the victims of the shooting were sent. This man shot and killed 6 people and injured 30-something others. He's taken into custody. We have a DoorDash driver, to my knowledge, not guilty of any criminal activity, and he is shot 60, 90 times. Why is it when it comes to Black people and police encounters, we're dead? We are never given the benefit of the doubt that maybe we don't have a gun in our hand. Or Philando Castile, he says to the officer, I have a legal gun. He's dead. The law says we can carry guns. But as soon as an officer sees a gun in the hand of a Black person, it's a weapon and you draw on us and you kill. I don't care what their individual white stories are. Why is it white people who are guilty of criminal activity? Dylan Wolf killed 9 people at a church. He's taken into custody. And I believe fed at Burger King. These are stories. So their individual stories how does this compare? And then we have incidents where, in my humble opinion, white people provoke an encounter. If I go back to Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, he's told, don't follow this man. He does it anyway. Well, you approach someone, I would think we have stand your ground, the right of self-defense. And then if we smack you back, now you're justified in killing us. Why are we always the dead one? Why is it, I can't think of his name right now. I think he was a swimmer somewhere in California. He rapes a woman, puts her in a trash can. Oh, he can't go to jail because he's a swimmer. And we go to jail for jaywalking practically. These are our stories. This is what happens to us. We get stopped and the police officer wants to know, where are you going? Where are you coming from? Why is that relevant? Why did you stop me? Was I speeding? Did I do it wrong? What is that? So these are the stories that I would tell, and that's why narrative is important, because I believe I cited Woodson in this paper. He says we're taught that Black people have made no contribution. We think of Rome and the Greeks, and white people have just created everything on the planet, and Black people have made no contribution to the march of human history, when without our contribution in pretty much every discipline, whether it's the light, the stoplight, plasma, etc., we're even something in the cell phone, where would we be? other than, I guess, on the side of the road with someone's knee on our neck. I'll get less animated now.
I see another hand, Teresa O'Keefe.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Barbara. It's a tremendous paper, and I really appreciated it. And I want to, I think, respond to Maureen to say, I think one of the challenges is to actually have the counter narratives available and ask participants, say, okay, we have these two different stories. What kind of sense do you make out of it? How do you reconcile these realities? And I think the importance of doing that as a white educator is significant, because the burden is way too often on the Barbara Fears of the world to say, look does this make any kind of sense to you? And creating spaces that people can look at it and wonder about it is, I think, important to the process. Because that's a reality we all have to face. And they might say, well, I don't know these things. Well, here's an opportunity for you to know them. Let's talk about these things. Let's raise them up. And take that responsibility on as white people to enrich the stories there for them, because the ones that Barbara's referring to are all in public record. They're all right there in front of us. They're all in the news headlines. And to just wonder aloud with people, well, what kind of sense does this make? Now, people will be making some kind of sense, but once they probably start talking about it, or that sense begins to get challenged or expanded on, like, well, they were probably doing something bad. Well, maybe they weren't, because in this situation, the person clearly was doing something bad and they got escorted to Burger King or wherever. I think that it's upon us to kind of anticipate the defenses people will bring to the table and then problematize those defenses, not in a way then that makes them feel in that moment defensive and uncomfortable, because the material itself will make them feel defensive and uncomfortable. So you have to create a space and nothing good will come from that. So to create the space that says, all right, let's think about this together. This is uncomfortable. Let's enter into it. I think is upon us as religious educators to kind of lead the way in that process. So, and Barbara, I do actually want to raise though a question and an appreciation. You placed, I'm sorry, I've got construction workers outside and I'll go on mute in a moment. You placed the stories in your paper that I found really interesting, the little snippets that you had there. I'm scrolling up my paper here. How would you envision using stories like that in a religious education experience? And I will mute myself now.
I chose these stories because they showed a variety of ways in which people have responded to individual and institutional acts of aggression and racism, and because we see them manifested today. So it says we're not necessarily angry and upset over things that happened 400 years ago. We're talking about things that happen now. We're seeing these things play out in the exact same way. When the, I can't think of his name right now. I don't know if he had a name. The one that's laughing, making up songs about Massa falling off the mule. And then we have Laura Ingraham pretty much telling LeBron James to just shut up and dribble. It's the same, or people get upset over Colin Kaepernick kneeling. Just entertain us, as though that's our role on the planet, to entertain. And yet, if you listen to Black comedians, we have been known to take our pain and find humor, and that's how we have survived. And then when I included a family story about my own grandfather, when he went from sharecropping to being an actual landowner, and someone coming to kill him. What does that say about the threat of progress when you are trying to, when we are told just work hard? In fact, I recently bought a book to see what the counter to CRT is. And this person said, just get a high school diploma, just, be in a household with father and mother, etc. Okay. I don't believe my grandfather had a high school diploma, but my grandfather and grandmother were together, raising a family. He buys land and the plantation owner comes to kill him because of that. Because of your own personal progress and success. Same thing we see with Black Wall Street, personal progress and success. And yet it doesn't stop us. We keep doing it. And we keep doing it. And we keep doing it. Just like the one that was in the water. He was not going to come out that water. At some point, you have drawn a line in the sand and said, I'm not going to yield to this intimidation. So to me, this is how we use the stories. It's no different for those of us who go to the biblical text, their stories. We elevate their stories and call them sacred. Why are our stories not sacred? And held as important and encouraging and worth emulating. I mean, in part, when I think of Anne Wimberly's story linking our stories with the biblical stories and making ethical decisions, that's the purpose.
One of the, Teresa, your question reminded me of the paragraph about adultification of Black youth. And I've been invested myself in spending some time with child theology. And when I think about children's Bibles and Bible stories about children and certain analyses, including 2 Kings and about the boys who came out to taunt Elisha, and some of the scholarship around whether those were really teenage boys or whether they were young soldiers. And so some of these questions of what is a child, as we use our biblical stories as models in religious education, the adultification chapter really resonated with me around those narratives. How are we using stories of children in the Bible? Even, in this Roe v. Wade dialogue, as we revisit, what are ages of consent for teenagers and what are we asking of 14-year-olds? I think this question of what is a child in some of our religious education narrative is quite useful. That's where my mind went with Teresa's question in relationship to Barbara's paper. Father Nwadichie, I see you. I saw your hand.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I hope it's morning where you are. I'm in Maryland, and I was referring to. Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Your paper. I apologize. I didn't listen to it all because I was distracted. But I can see your intensity, and is merited intensity. I think that the topic, the subject under discussion is pretty intense. And I was wondering, I'm not going to refer to Teresa O'Keefe, whether or not you sense the intensity in Barbara's presentation and reaction to questions, and whether there is any way of discussing this subject without it being intense. I mean, that's my worry. Is there a way? Because here is somebody who has a narrative that it seems to me by its very nature, it is intense. Is it possible to de-intensify it without removing from the nature of the subject itself? Is there a way Barbara could have presented this intense material to a person of another, to the other, right? And the intensity doesn't come out. Is there a way that is possible for you, for instance, O'Keefe, or any other person? Does my question make sense?
Yes, it makes complete sense. And I love the fact that we're having more of a conversation in this presentation. thank you for that question. I think that intensity will be part of the process. You know, I think it's going to be, and you have to, as educators, be prepared for it. But intensity isn't to be confused with animosity. And intensity is not to be confused with lack of respect. So as I think about it as an educator, what's really incumbent on me is to set the space that allows students, learners to gain a sense of awareness of one another, such that they can grow in their respect for who the other is who they're in conversation with. And part of growing in respect is actually hearing that intensity and taking it on and saying, wow, Barbara really feels this. This is really important to her. And I got to take it in. In fact, I've got to start paying attention to it because she's so intense about it. But I have to do it in such a way that, and this is my own work and this area of walking across differences, is somehow as a learner, I have to feel secure enough in the space that I actually can open myself to hear Barbara. You know, if I'm feeling too threatened, and we know what happens, I feel too threatened, it just heightens the injury that's going to happen. And so the question for me is, how do I create this space that allows people to get to know one another, to get to hear really intense stories, so that we can begin moving forward and making some changes, you know? And it's so important that it's really important to do. And very often we don't. We just say, if I just come in and load, then it'll take care of things. So in this opportunity, I had a chance to hear Barbara. I read her paper. I appreciate what she's saying. I have a sense for the intensity that's in the paper. I have a sense for her. But you know, it's not automatic.
I would just like to say that Black passion is always mischaracterized.
I would like to say something.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yes, Dr. Barbara, I just want to, first of all, thank you so much for your work and your intensity and your passion. And I don't know the gentleman's name that spoke from, I think he said Maryland. My question, I want to know where your question comes from, because as a Black religious educator, a Black female religious educator, at my graduate school, I was always tone policed. I am always like told that I'm always too loud. I'm always too intense. I'm too passionate. And I don't understand. I don't know if it's an issue of respectability politics. And I just sincerely want to know, like, where your question comes from, because it's like, I feel like Black folk, we bear the brunt of violence and trauma and all of this stuff. And it's also on us to be respectable and to be calm and to make white folks feel like safe and comfortable. And I don't really understand why that is. I just don't understand. And like Dr. Barbara was saying, that we're passionate, we're embodied people. And so you see us in church, we're happy, we're praying. It's like, it's always something about the way we are that is to something. And I don't understand what's wrong with being intense. And I really want to thank Dr. O'Keefe for what she said about setting the space, because I think that is important too, as facilitators of difference and opening up a conversation to allow working across cultures, working across class, working across race, right? We're the only ones asked to be different. And I don't understand why that is. So I really would like to know where your question comes from. What is that?
Thank you for asking that question. My question comes from the same frustration. I don't know if I use that word appropriately in characterizing. I feel frustrated when I I get that kind of pushback that I am so intense and animated. I needed to have put it in a certain way in order to encourage the other person to participate. And I am kind of curious in this forum to say, has anybody tried? Is my experience unique? And since we are holding a conversation in a mixed race forum, is there a better way as a religious educator I could introduce a topic that is this intense and it doesn't intimidate someone else? I'm just curious. Is because it seems to me that the nature of the subject is intense because we are literally talking about this is self-preservation. The experience of the Blacks, the colored people, is this situation. We're living in a situation or system that is literally snuffing the life out of us. And you cannot but scream. And so, if in that anxious moment or what is the name of the gentleman who died in New York? I can't breathe. Is there a way he could have said, I can't breathe, and to represent his reality? And even in that moment of anxiety and gasping for his life, his captors continue to intensify the pressure. I am not blaming him for Eric Gardner. Thank you, Eric Gardner. Yes, I am not blaming him for screaming for his life. I am saying, oh, how much more could he have done in order to call attention to his plight? So, has anybody tried anything different? I'm just curious. That's where I'm coming from. Does my presentation make sense to you now?
Yes, it does. Your presentation made me think of, I'm in Atlanta, so I'm teaching and I'm explaining worship and the historical sort of ramifications of African American worship and why we worship the way we do. And a white colleague comes in and knocks on the door and tell me that could you bring your voice down? You're very loud. So I was thinking about how a lot of times we try to morph or change the way we present information, and we're still treated unjustly. So I think that I have given up on that, trying to change who I am, because I don't think it's gonna make a difference. Yeah.
Wow. This is some seriously powerful. We're digging deep here, and it's powerful to behold in this room, in this space. S. Addie Lorraine, I see you. In the balance of time, we'll hear your comment.
Well, actually, many of the things I was going to say have been said, so maybe with respect to time, I would just say, actually, racism is a white problem and not a Black problem. The Black problem is to resist the colonization of the mind, which we have duly received. But racism really is a white conversation, and with suppressing text and with everything saying, leaning toward, we can't teach what makes you feel uncomfortable. I'll leave my, rest of my comments have been stated, so.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I make one closing remark before we move on? It would be short-sighted to sense my intensity or my passion to be solely around race and gender. I am passionate about education, and that's what you hear. And I would suggest that all genders and all races need to be educated at this time, and educated around this matter. And since critical race theory does speak to race, racism, and power, and as I said, rooted in radical feminist studies, this is about education. If you think that we're not fighting a battle that our ancestors have fought, if you think, for example, this Roe v. Wade is just, you know, the first one, there was a Twitter discussion about revisiting Plessy versus Ferguson. I am too old to pick the cotton my grandfather and my father picked. This is a serious matter. We are seeing this. To me, if we are not careful, we will. We just really need to pay attention. They've gone after K through 12. They will be coming after us and legislating what we can teach. And right now, we are not under them telling us what we can teach in our schools and what we can teach in our churches. And we need to create a learned populace among our membership. I'm passionate about education.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's an excellent segue as well to our next paper, where the interdependence and interest convergence that you've talked about as we move to Ombeni's paper about intercontextualization. And I'll just read a bit of bio. I know some may have joined us since we began at the top of at the bottom of the hour at 9:30. Ombeni Martin Ulime is a student at Luther Seminary and is a Tanzanian citizen who is both a pastor and a teacher by profession. He's interested in interfaith research, and the presentation will focus on the aftermath of religious education in the Tanzanian context, because there are challenges facing it due to socioeconomic, political, and global changes. The presentation will discuss how the intercontextual model of religious education in the Tanzanian context is the right approach to resolving the threat of its pitfalls. So we continue with learning more about the threats to what we teach in religious education and how our interests may be intertwined. I pass it to you, Ombeni.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Okay. So my presentation is about the aftermath of religious education. Oh, my God. In Tanzania, because, my God, I don't see. Yeah. Can I go on?
Yes, please do. We can hear you fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to do a research on the aftermath of religious education in Tanzania. This can work even in other parts of the world, even in America or whatever you can call. So if you see today, religious institutions are facing student dropout. So what are the causes of dropout? Because we do not touch the concern or the interests of the youth, the interests of the people. Maybe we are lagging behind, or maybe we don't know the needs of the the students. So institutions, religious institutions, even the church members are dropping down. So if you come to Tanzania, for example, you'll see that the country is a union of two countries, of two sovereign states, the Tanzania mainland and the island on the other side. And they got independence at different years. One got independence 1961, the mainland, and the island got 1963. So you'll see that the island was colonized by by German, and the mainland was colonized by German, and the island was colonized by Arabs. So when it came to religious education, when they became a United Republic of Tanzania, there were several challenges. So this education in Tanzania has undergone 3 phases. Phase 1 was pre-colonial. The pre-colonial, the second was colonial. The third was post-colonial or independence. And the fourth is a global period. So during the first phase, education was delivered through what? Education system. It was gender-oriented, and it was hereditary. And it was delivered through what? Oral tradition. There was no books, you know what? So children were just imitating, even the system of worship, they were just imitating from what they got from their fathers, or what they learned from their fathers. And they were not questioning. But the second, during colonial era, the insistence was on 3 areas: reading, know how to read. Second was to know how to write. And third was to know how to count your money. Sorry. So it was like that. So whatever was delivered, blacks were given the lowest job, and the white were given the collar jobs, the high position. So it was racially oriented also. When you come to the religious system, likewise, there were churches which in Africa, Africans were not allowed to worship and so forth. So the religious system is like some sort of colonial mentality, you see? And Africans, whatever Africans was neglected, was associated with paganism, witchcraft, even sometimes they called it hooliganism. But during the third phase, 1950s up to 1970s, it's about a liberation struggle. Countries in Africa struggling for independence and so forth. So even religious systems, they had to liberate. The only way to change was enculturation, to focus through the culture, to focus to a particular context. It was contextualization or enculturation. But this system went on up to 1980s after structural adjustment policy, which was implemented by World Bank and IMF. So the system was, political system changed, and economic system changed, and a drastic change even on the religious system. So they said, no, we can't continue with the enculturation and contextualization because you just focus on a particular context. No, now we are going to the globalization. You can't survive under contextualization under the auspices of globalization. We have to cope with different contexts. We have to, the education, religious education should be prepared. These people, these children, these religious institutions, seminaries, to go or to move according to the situation, to go into the global system. So the only thing was to send scholars in different countries, Scandinavian countries, Europe, Asia, and Africa, to learn different contexts. because we are working with the people from different areas all over the world. They are coming to Tanzania, and Tanzanians are moving to other parts of the world. If you come to America, there is a Swahili community at Minnesota, which is exceptional. It's not a purely American context. It's not a purely Tanzanian context. It's intercontext. It's in between. It's not ancient also because of intermarriages and so forth. So they worship at Holy Trinity downtown in Minneapolis. So Holy Trinity Church. So they have their own kind of teaching, their own kind of nurturing children, their own kind of mentoring them. And every year, at least twice or thrice, they invite people from Tanzania to inspire the children to cope with the situation. Likewise, in Africa, in Tanzania, we invite people from America and from Scandinavian, from German, from Asia, to teach some of the values of those cultures, and we come out with a certain culture, which we call it intercontextual, intermingling of culture, of context. So you see that the purpose is to make them flexible. So intercontextual, in short, you can say that it is a process of intermingling together different contexts in the globe, like Western, Asian, Eastern, and African. So the global North and the global South become together. You come with a certain kind of approach, which will help people, will help the religious institution to be flexible. When you come to America, you have flexibility. You don't come with conservatism, African conservatism, or African notions that this and this. No, you just in between. And this is very important because the model is the best approach in facilitating teaching and learning and religious education. Why? Because you take various contexts in the world and appreciate the local. You appreciate your local. You come with their local, you are maintaining your local. You alleviate the global to the local. Another, that intercontext system responds to the needs of the society, of the modern society, because you can't come with a mere African context or Tanzanian context while you are in America. You have to learn the culture, you have to learn the tradition, so that the system that, because the former system was teacher oriented, but now is student oriented. Now we don't call teachers, we call it facilitators, because teaching is just like spoon feeding, but facilitating, you help them to reflect, to make reflections of what they have. So we believe that all are learners. The teacher is a learner and students are learners. So both parties are learners. So the students have something to learn from the teachers, and teachers have something to learn from students. So another issue is that in Tanzania, we realize that a contextual is not very much appropriate. The appropriate is intercontextual, because the world is full of culture, different cultures. Multiculture is full of religious pluralism and is full of different contexts. So the only way is to cope with those contexts. Another is to rescue the dropouts of children attending the churches and so forth. You'll see that I quoted a certain book by Rich Milhenia, page 11. In America, the ELOC conducted research that the number of children, the number of members were dropping out. The problem is that they never learned other contexts. You can't come just maintain your liberal context or your conservative context without learning other contexts, what others are doing. For example, today, the religious education is facing with the two realms, one of liberal and another of conservative. So they both are just barbecuing on their side. So the only thing is to bring them together, the conservative and the liberal, and to find a suitable approach. The suitable approach is intercontextual. The context of the conservative and the context of the liberal together. So when you bring them together, I'm sure that we realize that the only thing is we're gonna rescue the dropouts. Another is to bring unity between the global north and the global south. So the only thing is to have harmonious relationship between the global north and the global south. How can you have harmonious relationship between the global north and the global south if you come with the global approach, global north approach, without running the global south approach? So the intermingling of this brings unity between Europe, the West, the Asia, and Africa. And if you go, for example, and this intercontextual approach in religious education was adapted to some of the Scandinavian universities and started at the University of Oslo, Norway. So Tanzania decided to send scholars to learn the intercontextual and to bring it in Tanzania. So we are practicing. And for example, in my country, Tanzania is one of the countries which is, you can say, is peaceful country. We have more than 120 ethnic groups. Yet, because of familyhood policy, our own language, Swahili, and this intercontextual approach to the religious institutions, to the religious education, you will see that there is no much tension between within the religion, between Protestants and Catholics and Pentecostalism and so forth. You will see that they are working harmoniously. There is a interfaith dialogue, there is interreligious relations and so forth, because of this, of the so-called intercontextual model. You take the context, you learn other contexts while you maintain your context. How do we maintain our context? You take good things from those contexts, you alleviate your context. And what you think they are extreme to your context, you modify it. You modify them. So another is intercontextual. It helps people to bring people back to religious education. Why? Because when students go to join other universities all over the world, they come with their own context. They are adapted in a certain context because of the research. When you are doing research in a particular country, you are being swept, you are being driven by our research. So how can you bring them back together? Is to take those contexts and to make a comparative analysis with your context. So when you make them without ignoring the context home. So that's why you see that in Tanzania now, all the schools have adapted, and they are still adapting this intercontextual approach. So we think it's the right approach because it brings people together, it brings unity, it brings love and peace and tranquility. I would like to say that intercontextual approach brings the sense of belonging. Why? You know that you are in America, you know you are in Asia, you start that context, Yet you have to know you make so like a comparative analysis with your context, and the first principle in religious education was think that you have to know yourself. So there's and people or children now, scholars in religious education, in religious institution, they think they come to know that we belong to this. And the way of, why I say, because it's one of the way of honoring ancestors. You have to know your tradition and your other contexts. Then you intermingle them together. When you intermingle them together, you don't spoil your originality. You don't spoil your identity. As a Tanzanian, I remain as a Tanzanian. That's why you see that when I'm in America, I have to, in the morning at 8, I have to worship American service. But at 2, there is Tanzanian service in Minneapolis. I have to go. So I have to attend 2 sessions every Sunday to learn American system worship, a system of religious system. But I have to maintain my Tanzanian system of worship. Thank you for listening. You are welcome for challenges, questions, whatever you can call.
Thank you so much for the significant reflection that you have done to look at the stakes of our religious education practices in a global world, especially when our young people have access to, and all of us have it. Some of us utilize our global tools and accesses to connecting and connectivity across the digital world and in virtual spaces. And so it's very powerful and so timely how you talk about what those stakes are for us. I can imagine that there are a variety of questions, and so the floor is open for the time we have. We've got just about 20 minutes for some dialogue.
I have a question, and it may have been addressed. Again, I'm having connection issues, so keeping my camera off keeps me from getting offline. But I know sometimes we talk about people having the tools. How do you suggest educating and getting those, reclaiming those students or those under our leadership who don't have the tools and we don't have the means to provide the tools? How do we reclaim that as religious educators? How do we get into those spaces?
Okay, as religious educators, where, for example, if you Google, for example, the religious institution in Norway, all religious institutions in Norway are written inter-contextual model. All the learning, almost all the learning are inter-contextual model, especially if you go to the faculty of theology at the University of Oslo, is inter-contextual theology. Even in Tanzania, it was contextual theology. They realized that context is lacking because it just focuses on a certain context. And another thing, if you have to know the schools of thoughts. I've written some of the schools of thoughts, and from Frederick Rudyk, he wrote a book, in the book by Mary Hess. So inside there is an article he wrote about the approaches in the world. the Athenians, which is to culture the soul, and the Germans, which prepare the scholasticism, and the American approach of preparing good pastors and good workers. So you need to bring those together. If you read that book, I think page 146, and I have written here, and yeah. If you read 164, sorry, 142 up to 143, teaching, reflecting in a theological context, Kierkegaard, written by Frida Rudig, page 7 of my paper. That footnotes. This book is found in, the book is written by Mary Hess and another scholar, and Mary Hess is one of the members in this Religious Education Association. So he presented the real intercontextual. Thank you.
Father Nwabiche, I see your hand.
Thank you very much. I thank you for Ulime. I believe that's your name. I'm also from Africa. I am specifically from the part of Nigeria, southeastern Nigeria, called Biafra land. You may have heard about Biafra. You are from Tanzania, right? So the experience of colonization and the role played by the Christian missionaries is under scrutiny. I just put together a manuscript. I am juggling between publishers. Maybe some of you will have some thoughts on who might be a good publisher for my work in this new global environment. So I appreciate your presentation, and I thought you did a marvelous work describing this intercontextual, because I'm pretty much from the point of view of philosophy, I wonder who makes the determination of what approach is good and for who. I worry about that. And in my own approach, I prefer a situation where I'm able to articulate that there is a philosophy, there is a colonial philosophy that was embedded in the missionary evangelism and education that we need to deconstruct. And the context for education remains the same. It is either education in the family, education in the church, education. Today we have the social media, and so there is a diversity of contexts already available. But what I have issues with is how sound is the philosophy that is being implemented with whatever method in these multiple contexts. My opinion is that we have to have a philosophy that is sound, and I define soundness as that which has the good of the receiver of that education in mind. Is not prescriptive that I have to the colonial experience in Africa is pretty much an experience that was in the context of an encounter with Europe. And they came as missionaries, they came as merchants, they came as explorers, but with one agenda, colonialism. So whether it was in the church, whether it was in the business, whether it was in the civil administration, it was a colonial issue. And now for us who received that kind of education, whether it was in the school, whether it was in the church, whether it was in commerce and trading, it is the one and the same thing. So what I am offering, or what I think is the issue is, do we recognize that the education we received is a colonial education that considered people like me less than and not equal to? Do we recognize that? Immediately we make that recognition, then we know we are able to identify the beast we are dealing with. And here comes the presentation made by Dr. Barbara Fears of saying, no, I have to resist this. And I am going to resist this, whether it is in the school, whether it's in the church, whether it is in the social media, whether it is where vacationing, whatever the context. In that way, we are helping to promote a society and a discourse that is equally available to all and where people can flourish. So I guess the question I wanted to ask you is this a method of intercontextual approach being, how is it being implemented? Is it something that is done in the school, and is it something targeted to a certain population, the youth, or how does it pan out in the whole society? Since as a group, we all, or I would say, the whole space, the whole social political space was colonized. So if you have this approach, how are you reaching beyond a gender, beyond sex, beyond age, for instance? How does that operate? Thank you.
Okay. For a number of years, this methodology didn't come just in a single day. It took a number of years. In 1969, there was a meeting in Tanzania which comprised all theologians and other bishops and the bishops. So they discussed a lot and they came with your question, how can we implement? And I have written somewhere here that they say that Africa have its own philosophy, or we are just copying and pasting. In 1969, 1974, Africans met, I think, in Zambia. They discussed about moratorium treaty, how to implement their own theology and so forth. Because for a number of years, they have been reigning from what? Beat African philosophy and the Nyamiti, Ancestor and so forth. But in 1990s, there was a scholar known as Jason Wiga Mugambe, I think from Kenya. He came with the approach which was imparted to all the universities in East Africa. He calls it a theology of reconstruction and deconstructing the theology, using the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. Yeah, it got support, but not very much. Later on, they said, no, we need to sit to formulate a theology, is not just blaming the colonialist. For how long are we going to blame the colonialists in Africa? They said, no, let's just take up some of these philosophies. So they learned from the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church insists on three selves: self-governing, self-propagation, and self-sustaining. They say this might be the point of departure, to have self-governing, to have self-propagation, and to have self-sustaining. Especially in 1992, the LMC Lutheran Mission Corporation, formerly it was known as LOCS, Lutheran Coordination Services. So they changed from LOCS to LMC. that we are partners in those. So they had to learn different areas. I mean, to make long stories shorter, that they learned from Mandela's philosophy, which insisted that paradigm shift, total change, to overhaul all the colonial mentalities. In South Africa, Mandela overhauled the apartheid policy to come with what he used to call a paradigm shift in Soweto and so forth. And in Rwanda also, they learned from what is taking place in Rwanda, resolving after the genocide. They used the local court, the court Gachak. So they said, no, we have to learn also how peace and reconciliation committee in South Africa through Desmond Tutu. Now we need to come with our own. So the point of departure now, I come to your question, was to start from schools and the religious institutions. From schools, we have to nurture the children, we have to inspire them so that they could know these different contexts. Likewise, those facilitators, I mean, at the seminaries, all the seminaries in Tanzania, and the universities, they say, no, we have to change like this. For example, the giant university in Tanzania is the University of Dar es Salaam. In 2010, it was transformation program to transform this. In 2011 up to 2020, it was building toward excellence. It means that they want to build toward excellence. So it's to start with all institutions, all learning institutions. The learning institution should be used as a point of departure in disseminating the knowledge to other people. The youth can easily disseminate the inter-contextual philosophy to the entire population. Then we came to the adults now. So we are still on the religious institution, the schools and the universities, you see? But later on, the plan is to go to adults and even to other people who are not gifted with the school learning. That's why you will see those, the Tanzanian who are in America, they invite people to inspire them. And then some of them are being inspired. There is an organization working through what they are teaching through what YouTube channel and Facebook and Telegram. So they teach them, they try to inspire them to know this intercontextual. And even at Minnesota, there's youth gathering. I went to Columbus, I found they are doing the same. I heard that even in New York, they are doing the same. So even the confirmation, the Tanzanians are not getting confirmation from ELOCA churches. They are getting confirmation classes from Tanzania. They are teaching through YouTube and so forth. And they are being confirmated. So they get confirmation, the catechism and so forth. So there is some approach which is working now, which is effective. I think. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I just want to point out we're coming up on our time. I do want you to hear Karen Mosby's question because I know that it certainly benefits our panelists to hear the questions that people bring to the table and the responses. And she's also just posted it in the chat. Thank you so much. And you've got a couple others. Chuck has put a comment in the chat as well. And then one more thing in the chat, our tech facilitator from REA has put the feedback link. So it looks like in the chat, if you go up 3 comments, you'll see the feedback link. And I want to encourage everybody to click that right now. Mary Hess has put it back in there again. So now it's at the bottom. But let me read, maybe in the interest of time, I'll read these 2 questions from the chat. Chuck has put, what is in the pre-colonial indigenous Tanzania narrative, symbols, rituals, customs that has lost relevancy today individually and collectively? Is a reinterpretation necessary to make these relevant for today? The same question can be applied to the colonial, post-colonial, and current state of religious traditions and religious education. And Karen Mosby has also placed a question for us, a comment, reflecting on both of their presentations. I offer that it is essential that religious education prepare emerging generations by emphasizing the importance of the practice of Sankofa, reclaiming, retelling, retrieving, and remembering our stories, and teaching the practice of being okay with being uncomfortable and learning how to resist, protest, and disagree. These are significant reflections that are shared here. I want to, Paulette, I had also written down your name as having a hand up earlier, and I don't know if you still had that. For the benefit of our panelists, just to have the experience of knowing how much the listeners were engaging with their work.
Yes, thank you. Paulette Isaac Savage, University of Missouri, St. Louis. Primarily just wanted to make a comment pertaining to the last presentation. Just really appreciated your acknowledging the importance of us being facilitators of learning and, you know, realizing that we should be learner oriented as opposed to teacher oriented, because I think sometimes that can be a barrier to learning, to people not participating in adult education. And so just wanted to acknowledge that I appreciated your bringing that to the forefront for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope that people are taking names because so many thinkers and contributors have been here, whether verbalized or in the chat, and the responses to what I would call the stakes of religious education, the stakes of it. Both of our panelists and all of our contributors to dialogue have highlighted our interdependence in our many contexts, and what is necessary about what our religious education is doing in other arena, and how that's impactful, and who we are preparing to have impact in our wider context and global context as well. What a gift to sit here with all of you this morning. I am supposed to end early. We've got a few minutes. Please click the link and respond so that our conveners will be able to continue to organize us and celebrate the work that gets contributed to this conference.